into our Zoom room webinar here. It's my great pleasure to be our moderator this evening. We have three distinguished speakers to describe what's happening in the biopharma space in terms of collaborations between China and the US. What we hope to do is to identify some current opportunities and some of the challenges that are in this space. As I said, my name is Jeffrey Moe. I'm on the faculty here at Duke University. You have program materials about the three of us. It will be my pleasure to introduce each of the speakers, to give them 10 minutes to describe their perspective on the opportunities and challenges. What I would ask the audience to do is to use the Q&A button, which is on the bottom of your screen, to load in some questions as you're listening to our speakers. And then what I will be doing is I will be curating those questions to see as they fall into categories. And then when the three speakers have completed their remarks, then I will start putting questions to them. So I'm looking forward to seeing your questions in the Q&A and so on. So the order tonight of our speakers this morning for some of you is Dr. Lim Falwong, who's professor in the program in emerging infectious diseases at Duke-NUS Medical School, and I will describe more about him in a moment. Yuanchao is a marketing manager at Amgen, and I will say more about him when he is the second speaker. And then finally, Dr. Yishi, who is the founder and managing partner of Lilly Asia Ventures. So let me begin by asking Dr. Lim Falwong to speak. Let me say a little bit about him. He's our distinguished professor from the Duke-NUS Medical School in Singapore. He holds a number of honorary positions and memberships. He is currently the editor-in-chief of the Virology Journal. In 2018, Professor Wang was nominated to serve on the Global Viral Network Leadership Committee, leading the GVN Southeast Asia node. He serves on the WHO's International Health Regulations Emergency Committee, and he is a distinguished fellow in many ways and has inspired all of us with his work. So Dr. Lim Falwong, please take 10 minutes to present to us some of your thoughts about the opportunities and challenges in US-China collaborations.
Thank you, Joe, for the introduction. And I have quite a few slides, so I'll try to go through quickly. So I'm coming from really the science and the pandemic aspect and try to emphasize the importance of basic research and international collaboration. So we are more than 13 months into it, but just for the people in the audience, a quick review of the major early events. The outbreak really started early December, and then by March 11, the pandemic was declared. So these are all the, the events in the media. But for me as a scientist, I think there's one thing obviously not in the public is that actually very important is on January 11th, the whole genome sequence of this SARS-CoV-2 was announced, and that really impacted all subsequent responses. So that's what I try to say is, the technologies, from basic research, what called during peacetime, before that pandemic, really laid the foundation. And I'm going to name three of them. One is a next generation sequencing, mRNA vaccine, and then it's a neutralization test we developed called a surrogate virus neutralization test. The power of next generation sequencing in etiology investigation, I just contrast the SARS, 2002, 2003, it took 5 months before we knew what's going on. Initially, we thought it was bacteria, then virus, and then which virus, But for COVID-19, 10 days from the symptom to know exactly that whole genome sequence was, published. So that changes really the dynamics of response. And then for vaccines, this is the table of conventionally how long the vaccine will take. Like a polio vaccine, takes, almost a century to get it to a mass application eradication eventually. But for mRNA vaccine, that's 8 months. So but it took more than 30 years in the background to do the basic research. And then my own area is really to look at the importance of serology, the detection of specific antibodies. So all the red dot points are important for the exit strategy, right? We talk about herd immunity, longevity, vaccine efficacy. But there's also another scientific question remaining is the origin of the virus, where it's from. And also we worry about now the virus can be transmitted from human to animals. And that all need a really international collaboration because it's not limited in one country. So what needed is a very specific neutralization test and need to be species independent because we not want to use this for both human and animals. So that's our invention. We call it a surrogate virus neutralization and address both the detecting neutralizing antibody, but in a species independent manner. So this is how traditionally you do, you do the live virus, you need to in BSS3 with 4 PPE, and then the virus will bind to the receptor, in this case ACE2, and cause cell death. In the presence of neutralizing antibody, you block that. So it's a gold standard for specificity, but actually lots of disadvantages. You require BSS3, very slow, expensive, and not very reproducible because you have live virus. And you will never get regular approval. FDA will never approve that as a clinic testing. So our invention is about chemical simulation of this. So as you see, the diagram is the same that, in the presence of neutralizing antibody, you can block that. But we did a protein engineer. So we just engineered the receptor as a soluble protein, and we engineered the spike protein, just use the receptor binding domain. And now, from a 3-day, highly dangerous, expensive, test, become a 1-hour test you can do in any lab and clinical diagnosis lab, and become an ELISA plate base, basically. And so the product was launched on May 15th, and so a 1-hour test now you can done in any lab. And Duke already have this. We collaborated with Tom Denny a long time ago. And it's approved by FDA on November 6th. It remains the only test that approved by FDA, which can directly measure neutralizing antibodies, not only from infection, but now we apply more for vaccination. So this is being applied to address 2 really important questions. How did the pandemic start and how would the pandemic end, or how can we get out? So we use that to really survey animals, in our region, Southeast Asia. And we focus on bats and pangolins, and we found that they carry the antibodies, and eventually we found they also have the genomic sequence. Not the SARS-CoV-2 virus yet, but it's ancestral virus. So now from our work and others, within a very short period of 10 months, we found that although the human outbreak started from Wuhan in China, central China, in bats in our region, these are the stars from Japan to Zhejiang province, Yunnan province, Thailand, Cambodia, all carries what we call SARS-CoV-2. So basically the same virus, but different genetic composition. It covers a wide range of geographic location. In terms of how can we get out this pandemic, the total eradication from mankind, we achieved that with SARS-1 17 years ago. But I think more and more we realize maybe that's not possible. So maybe we have to live with that, SARS-CoV-2 become a seasonal virus. But I'm still sort of optimistic there's a middle ground, larger eradicated with sporadic infection events like measles virus in human populations. So no matter which one you go, is that the vaccine will play a key role, right? So currently, due to the production and logistic challenges, global herd immunity will take years. I mean, even in USA, as you know, and in China, these are 2 major countries. I think they're still behind in terms of reach herd immunity. So lots of discussion about should we use a vaccine or immunity passport for a partial and a strategic exit to the pandemic. So there are many factors to consider if you want to go down that path, right? You have the protective immunity comes both the neutralizing antibody and the T-cell immunity. And currently, realistically, you cannot measure T-cell immunity on a large scale. And the vaccine efficacy, you're talking about protection against disease or against transmission. Because until herd immunity is reached, the protection against the transmission is important. Although for individual level, protection against disease is good enough. And then the immune longevity, we still don't know how long this will last. So Can neutralizing antibody testing protect immunity? The key opinion leaders in the field, basically says that's really the gold standard, and it's really only the practical way to do it. So I will just emphasize to the people in the audience, you hear these two concepts, the vaccine passport, immunity passport, they're not equal, because not all vaccines are equal, and also not all individuals are equal. Even if you take the same vaccine, some people get really good protection, others don't, even with Pfizer and Moderna, So the last part, a few slides, is really supposed to be the discussion about, the current China-U.S. relationship, or just China-U.S. relationship in general, for me, is in the context of pandemic preparedness and response, and the importance and the challenges. So I just gave you, my personal experience in the last 30 years, So the development of this surrogate virus neutralization and the marketing and everything, CPAS, is really, the invention was done here using the Duke-NUS and in Singapore. The license was GeneScript in New Jersey. Production was their production in Nanjing in China. And launch was in Singapore. And currently regular approval is, everywhere, basically. So that just is a clear demonstration that, if you're decoupling of, any nation, let alone China-U.S., it will be disastrous for pandemic preparedness. So I go back to 17 years ago, the WHO mission to China for virus origin. There's lots of politics this time around, but 17 years ago, I was on the mission. We spent exactly 2 weeks time. This time they spent 4 weeks, because 2 weeks is just for quarantine. And we have 8 international members on the team, and one is from US, very high profile, and Shukai, it's the deputy director of CDC. We had unlimited access. We even went to the Chinese Military Medical Institute. But the key thing is that this is really all set a thing. Then eventually I led an international consortium of 5 institutes from 3 nations. The real work started after the WHO mission. So I'm gonna finish my talk with a dream, So it's not too late for China-US to collaborate. And we know that, the vaccine right now is being discussed, the immunity, longevity, whether we can heterologous mixing, we can prime one vaccine and boost with other. This is a commentary news from Nature, and says, yes, you can. They may be even better than just a homologous prime boost. So I'm just dreaming about this scenario, The inactive whole virus from China as a prime, because this has every antigen of the whole virus. If we boost with the US vaccine, the Moderna, which is mRNA, but only target one protein, and you may get a better, everything. So with that, I'm going to finish my talk, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. That was you covered a lot of material and did it very ably. So Yuanchao, she is a marketing manager at Amgen. He currently works at the global marketing function in the oncology product launch in China. He's worked in the US in the value strategy and marketing group. So I'm going to now ask Yuanchao to speak with us for 10 minutes about his own view of opportunities and challenges for US-China collaboration.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mo. And first of all, I'm really humbled to join this distinguished panelists here and share my view on this topic that I'm deeply passionate about, is this US-China dynamic in the biotech and healthcare space. Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are, where you're calling in. And first of all, I will just introduce a little bit about my background. I work at Amgen. Amgen is a leading biotech company located just South California. And we are one of the full-fledged biotech companies that doing everything from research to clinical trial process, to manufacturing, and all the way to marketing and commercialization of drugs. And our therapeutic focus include cardiovascular disease, neuroscience, inflammation, nephrology, oncology, and a couple others. So it's been really great 3 years working at Amgen in the commercial organizations. And since last year, I've been working on the Amgen BeiGene collaboration. So that gave me a really vantage point and to look into China-U.S. collaboration from a private sector, and that really is a really great experience for me. So you would probably ask, who is BeiGene? BeiGene is a 10-year-old biotech farmer founded in Beijing, China, and they already have a very established commercial operations in China. So long story short, Amgen and BeiGene decided to join force and commercialize Amgen developed oncology products in China. So we have this 20 oncology products that we will give the commercial rights to BeiGene to be launched in China. What I would say is that this is a really win-win situation for both companies. So I will start from the BeiGene part. It is a growing, really startup companies focused in oncology and biotech in China. And this deal really put BeiGene in the map in front of the global oncology community. And all of a sudden, BeiGene have like 20 innovative drugs that are going to be launched in China. Including a lot of the really good first-in-class innovative assets from Amgen, such as the KRAS inhibitor, which is for the lung cancer patient, and also the BiTE portfolio and other oncology products. And for Amgen, I think we have a really laser-focused goal of accelerate access of innovative products to more patients in China. So we are not looking at NPV for this deal. We are not looking at P&L. We're just looking at what we can really accelerate the pace to introduce more products to China patients. And BeiGene really serve as a liaison and provide us inroad for this largest growing oncology market in the world. So I just shared part of the story in terms of the US-China collaboration from a MMC company perspective, looking at how do we structure our China strategy. But there's also a growing number of cases where many MMC big pharma companies are actually licensing in assets from a growing biotech sector companies in China. For example, Novartis just bought a PD-1 from BeiGene to be commercialized in US, Japan, and a couple of European companies. I think similar cases also happen to Pfizer and Lilly. So I'm trying to make a point here that China is going to be a biotech superpower in the near future. So it is not going to be regarded just as a outsourced partners for manufacturing, for clinical research. And it is going to be a hot hub for R&D, for innovative drugs. And that's also give US and China, in the future compete in this biosector, in this biopharma space. And I think it will be really interested to see how that trend is shaping. I would close by saying that I was really excited to be part of the industrial and looking at two of the super power in the world and to help contributing to the advance and technology in biotech. And I think that it will be a good thing. Of the day, China and the US are not enemy to each other. We have our common enemy, which is cancer, which is disease. So I'm really positive in my lifetime, we will see the day that we eliminate cancer. And to that day, I will be happily out of work. So that will be conclude my part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very succinct, and we appreciate your brevity of remarks, but I think you're speaking to very, very profound and important issues in terms of the collaboration that can occur in our common enemy, which is cancer and other non-communicable diseases. In the case that Dr. Lim Falwong has spoken, of course, it's a communicable disease, but we're facing both challenges in this modern world. So it's my pleasure to present our final presenter, who's Dr. Yishi, who's the founder and managing partner of Lilly Asia Ventures. It's a biomedical venture capital firm with a focus on China and cross-border opportunities. Before this current role, Yi worked at Eli Lilly and Company in business development. He's had a great and long history of knowledge of both the U.S. and China, and we're delighted to have him here with our panel. So with no further ado, Yishi, please present to us your thoughts about the challenges and opportunities of the China-U.S. collaboration.
Thank you, Professor Mo. It's a great honor to be here, especially given that I'm actually a Duke alumni, and I'm actually a double Duke alumni. I spent 6 years at Duke from 1993 to 1999 to get a PhD in biochemistry and an MBA degree, both from Duke. So I felt very proud and very honored to be invited to speak on this panel. I grew up in China, and after college, I went to US, like a lot of my peers in my generation, to pursue graduate studies. And after Duke, I worked for a US pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly, which is based out of Indianapolis. And I worked there for almost 8 years. Both my kids were born in Indianapolis. And in 2008, Lilly sent me back to China to start a new business, making investment in biotech companies. And at that time, around 2008, it was really the beginning of biotech industry in China, because prior to that, the pharmaceutical industry in China was dominated by generics products. And so there's not much innovation going on. But around the time, 2008, we've started to see local Chinese talents getting into the biotech research, as well as so-called returnees who are studied and trained in US, Europe, going back to China to start companies. So we see the emergence of a great biotech industry in China, and that's why Lilly sent me back to China to start making biotech investments. And a few years later, I left Lilly to start my own firm, but doing the same thing, basically making investment in biotech companies. And Lilly, to this day, is still an investor in our funds. So how does our venture capital works? Well, we're basically sitting in the middle of two groups of stakeholders. On one hand are the biotech companies in China that are seeking capital, and so we're investing in them. On the other hand, where does the capital come from? Well, it doesn't come from me. I don't have that much money. So the capital actually comes from global investors. And in our case, 80% of the capital coming from US investors, including half of the Ivy League schools in the US are actually, their endowments are our investors. And we also have pension funds in the US. So a number of teachers' pension funds in various US states. And given that we're investing in healthcare, some of the US hospital systems are also our investors, so-called LP or limited partners. And of course, we also have other capital from all over the world, including China, Singapore, Middle East, Japan, and so on. So here you have a global base of investors giving money to me to invest in Chinese biotechs. Why? And the reason is because this capital, global capital, needs to invest where it could generate the highest returns. And where it could generate highest returns, basically where it has the biggest growth, economic growth. And China is, of course, the biggest economic growth driver for the world. So as you probably know, China drives 1/3 of the economic growth in the world, compared to US, even though US is the biggest economy, it today only drives around 15% of the economic growth of the world. So China is big. And for many years, global investors, including US investors, has been investing in China to leverage that growth. And why healthcare now? Well, it's because the middle class population in China is now booming. So there are around 450 million middle class population in China, which is around the number of the total US and Western Europe population combined. So there's a big middle class population in China. And as an economy developed into middle class, people will want better healthcare. So first, when people have money, they will spend on luxury goods. They probably go abroad for tourism. But at some point, they realize they need better healthcare for them to live better and live longer. And so people started to ask from China that why is it that when Apple launched their iPhone, Chinese consumer could get it around the same time, almost same day as the global consumer could get it. But when it comes to better medicine, when a new drug is launched in the US, it used to take many years for Chinese patients to get it. And so there's a complicated system and reasons for that. But another reason is because China does not have a domestic innovative drug industry to provide that supply to an ever-increasing demand. And that's in the history, but in the past 10 years, that domestic innovative biotech industry started to emerge, including what Yuanchao talked about. The BeiGene is one of the biotech companies emerged in the past 10 years to address that ever-increasing demand for better and more innovative medicines. And that's the opportunity for me personally, and that's also opportunities for global investors to invest in such booming biotech industries in China. So that's how the venture capital work and where capital come from, why invest in China healthcare at this time. Professor Mo also asked me to talk about the challenge. Well, like any venture capital business, the challenge is always finding something and like a diamond on the rough, that you have so many business proposals coming in and we need to pick the best to invest. And in our case, we have every year look at about 1,000 companies and we ended up making around 20 investments. So that's a ratio of 2% and probably less than the Duke acceptance rate. So it's a very selective process, and every day we spend a lot of time going through and these proposals and visiting many companies in order to find the best ones. And even that, we were not always successful. So for example, we missed the biggest biotech companies in China today, which is BeiGene, that Yuanchao talked about. But we do have the number 2, 3, and 4 companies in China, including CanSino, which makes COVID-19 vaccine that Professor Wang talked about. So that's the challenge, but that's also the joy of our business is it's very intellectually challenging. But when we invest in a great business, we not only help that company create better medicines to serve the needs of the Chinese patients, but also patients around the world. At the same time, we're making money for our global investors, including a lot of universities and pensions around the world, and hopefully someday for Duke Endowment as well. So I'll stop here and give the floor back to Professor Mo.
Thank you very much. Very helpful remarks. And of course, that engine of investment and identifying opportunities is important. Let me describe the kinds of questions that are coming in. So one, Dr. Lim Falwong has started with coronavirus, which of course is a global pandemic. We're concerned about it. And so there are some questions that we should put to that question. And then I think there's the broader opportunities that we see in both oncology, as Yuanchao was describing, and then the kinds of companies that we see that are emerging. So let me start first with the pandemic. So a couple of questions have come up, which is coping with the variants. And I know you had a particular vision, Linfa. Do you think your vision includes a way for us to cope with the variants that are emerging?
Yes, of course. You know, like my own research, that the surrogate virus neutralization test already have version 2, version 3 to deal with the UK and the South African variants. I mean, the good and the bad things about COVID-19, I think, in contrast to SARS 17 years ago, is social media. So the audience, even today's audience, is very educated about the variants, and of course we should be very worried about. But variants are only a very small component of that. And the current vaccine is that if you take the current vaccine and get a very high immune response, whether it's a B cell or T cell, and we have data to say you're still protect against the variants. But if you happen to be that individual that you have a poor immune response, then you're not only not protected against variants, you're not protected against the original virus. So today yesterday there was a news, in Xi'an city, in China, that the person was involved in taking the testing for imported cases. The person is vaccinated and still got infected with the original virus. So what I try to paint a picture is the variant certainly is something that going to be more difficult to handle than the original virus. But if we have a vaccine efficacy, at the individual level, everybody have a high, immunity, then it should be protected. Okay, so that's my kind of first line of answer. I noticed somebody asked whether the more vaccine is not the better, and we need a good quality vaccine. And are there any research going on? Yes, I mean, you're familiar with the clinical trials phase 1, 2, 3. So for most of the, in my field at least, I deal with very deadly viruses like SARS, Ebola. We don't have a chance to go beyond that, because we even don't have a chance for phase 3, because by the time we've developed any phase 3 medication or drug, usually the outbreak's already under control. So COVID-19 is different. So COVID-19 now, we have many phase 3 trials, and still, in certain countries, they're still spreading very badly. So what we have now, we call is a phase 4 study. So the phase 4 study is basically, the phase 3 is you get the safety efficacy, now like the Moderna, Pfizer, Sinovac, Sinopharm, all in mass vaccination. We're talking about millions and to the billions. So from that mass vaccination, we're still following the immune longevity and the protection against variants. So this is what we call a phase 4 study. And everywhere in USA, in China, in Singapore, we are all conducting that. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. And of course, we're all of our hopes as a global world are pledged on this. And as we expand the trials to include children under 6, this is important. So a broad question that was put, and I'll put it first to Yuanchao and then to Yishi. The question was raised. We know there were talks yesterday that just closed between the United States and China. And when diplomats say they were frank, that's code for saying they were difficult. So I'm just, the questioner has asked, do these broad political tensions between the United States and China pose barriers to this aspiration for creating global public goods, which are new medicines, new vaccines, whatever it might be? So Yuanchao, what's your experience within Amgen in terms of the experience of these broad macro pressures having an influence over what you're trying to do within your company, within Amgen?
Thanks, Professor Mo. And I will just speak from my own experience. I would say healthcare has no borders. So I don't see the current geopolitical tensions and also the trade war has prevented the collaboration between Amgen and our China partners. And I would just say that the clinical trials that we conducted are on a global level. And I think that in the past few years, China has really revamped its clinical trial process. So it is now much easier to get drug approved. So in the past, if you file for NDA, it might probably get approved in a couple of years. Now it's 60 days. And also, there's a lot of the government support to really advance healthcare, including to ask the global pharma to get some innovative drugs to be registered in China. So I think that is really some positive signal that at least I can see. The other part is that, we have this advancing science just introduced by Dr. Wang. And no matter it is a good drug from a US company or a good drug from a China company, we will definitely make it useful on a global level. So I will really be very positive that the healthcare industry is by the large part immune to the current tension between China and the US.
Thank you. Yishi, is it your experience that these macro pressures change the dynamic for you in terms of identifying and investing in promising opportunities, or are you able to be immune from that and simply find the opportunities that require investment and move them along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say compared to the other more sensitive industry like semiconductor, the healthcare is actually much better in terms of immune to the US-China tension. And part of the reason, as Yuanchao pointed out, is because healthcare is about humanity, and human health is the basic human needs. If someday there's a decoupling of the two countries and says that US medicine cannot get into China or Chinese medicine cannot be supplied to US, that's a terrible state. I think that's almost equal to the state of war between the two countries. So it's relatively speaking much better than other industries, but I would say that the sentiment actually created tensions. And it used to be around, I would say 3-4 years ago, there's a lot of Chinese investors going to US to invest in biotech companies. But now that percentage has decreased by almost 80 to 90%. And there's now only a few Chinese investors consistently invest in US biotechs. And US biotechs are needed capital to drive their growth, and that capital could come from all over the world. So it's sad that now they cannot tap into the Chinese source of capital. So that's definitely one negative that I see in terms of the impact of the China-US tension. But hopefully, with the new administration, I think hopefully things will get better. And I think the tension will always be there, but it's important for us to have the check and balance and maintain a good relationship, at least in the academic and in business side, so that there's continue to be exchange between the two countries.
Yes. So I think the three of you have all identified, what is our common issue, which is all of our citizenry would like better health. We would like to find new treatments and so on. So we share this common notion. So I just want to ask this question, and maybe I'm a little premature, but let's imagine ourselves post-COVID. So we'll probably be getting some booster vaccines as variants continue and so on. But I'm just curious, and I'll start with Linfa. If you take COVID out of it, and Yuanchao has already talked about oncology as one opportunity. What do you think is in the post-COVID world in terms of opportunities for collaboration between the U.S. and China? You're further upstream than our other two speakers in terms of basic science. What do you imagine might be emerging in terms of opportunities when we get past COVID-19?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm most focused on the pandemic area. In terms of industry, I think, so I was going to make a comment, different from the two other speakers, that my industry in terms of collaboration, that it's being hugely impacted by the US-China relationship, right? So post-COVID, we're already worried about SARS-3 because the current China-US relationship, or the whole kind of China-US is almost like West versus East, right? That is really bad. That's really bad for us to fight future pandemic. And I can guarantee you it will be another one, right? So we don't know when and where, basically. So So I have been thinking this hard. I think that we almost need a really high level. The biotech industry is important, but we need almost like a legal framework and an international organization. So in different forums, I've been talking about, WHO is almost a political kind of organization under UN. And during the pandemic, it has been criticized, it has been, debated. And so I was thinking that, Prof. Mo, you opened today's forum by saying, we should fighting the common enemies, diseases, the health issues. I'm just thinking, when we fight crimes, we have Interpol. I mean, Interpol is not perfect, but Interpol is much more effective than UN, for example. So, more and more I'm thinking that in the biotech industry, if you're dealing with infectious disease and next pandemic, we almost need a new framework. So, it's a dream to be politics free, but to be less dependent on politics. So for my industry, it's very important. And I have to address the first question in the Q&A, basically says, I did not mention about the hypothesis of, different origins of different possibility of origins. And then for that, sort of a student or faculty, whatever, who asked the question, I don't have the time, right? So I'll be truthful and scientific, but I don't have the time. So if Prof. Mo, if you allow me, I just show one slide to address that, because I think it's really important that we always thinking of technology, science, and biotech, how we collaborate. But this COVID-19 and the current China-U.S. relationship just demonstrate that, as us, whether you're a scientist or entrepreneur or you're a professor, if we can contribute, with the young student in the audience, while you're learning your MBAs, you're learning your PhDs, a postdoc, maybe we should also learn how to contribute to set the frame for the next. And so you talk about, this is if you can see my slides now, that's my lecture notes for a different I gave to Rockefeller University just last night. Actually, if I have 1 hour, I'll be discussing all the alternative hypotheses, and there are many, many of them, whether it's come from China or South China, is brought in by a bats or human or other animals. What's the role of the Huangdan seafood market? And the question was that to say there was already antibody in Europe before November 2019. We knew all of these, but nothing is conclusive enough for us as a scientist point a finger to the exact origin. So I will stop there. Basically, to answer your question is that post-pandemic, I think that we need to drive science, investment, economics, but I think we really need to look at the legal framework so we can stay away from politics as much as possible. Otherwise, you look at the economic loss, for COVID-19. Personally, I have been working in this field for 30 years, and we don't need to be where we are today. Okay, so that's the lesson that I think hopefully the students will take, and the next generation can do better. Thank you.
I appreciate you addressing the question that was raised.
Yeah.
And I guess my comment would be that we may one day know the answer to this, but it will be many years in the future. Yeah. And so to the degree that that question hangs there and keeps us from collaborating on what we need to do to either respond to variants, to create more vaccines, to have many different providers of vaccines, because there's a global need. Heavens, our friends in Europe are desperate for vaccine. So let me take the question further with Yuanchao and Yishi. What your own thoughts are about opportunities, and I think Linfa is raising a wonderful thought, which is that we'll never be free of politics, but is there a way that we could be freer to pursue what is our common enemy, which is disease that kills and it creates disabilities for humans? What do you think are the emerging opportunities beyond COVID? I know Yuanchao, you've already spoken about oncology, but I wonder if there are other areas that you see emerging.
Yeah, so Amgen has also a presence in China outside oncology. We have recently launched a cardiovascular drug, PCSK9 inhibitors, and it got into the NRDL list, which is a really popular term in China, meaning the National Reimbursement Drug List. So we will hope to see really a take up in the market this year. So I think from the Amgen perspective, China is the second largest market, just behind the US. So we want to really have a strong presence in China, both in oncology and other disease area. So that's why we collaborate with BeiGene to so that we can accelerate that pace.
Wonderful. Yishi, what do you see as emerging opportunities that are presenting themselves to you?
Yeah, I think the other part of the equation is at the regulatory level, the Chinese FDA, the US FDA, the collaboration between these regulatory agencies is another opportunity. And the reason is because now drug development is a global process, right? So for example, BeiGene or Amgen, their scientists develop a drug after their so-called preclinical testing. Now it needs to go into human testing, and human testing now is becoming more and more a global process because it's difficult to find sufficient patients for some disease, such as rare disease, in one country. And so in order to develop the drug, you do need to tap into a global patient base. And that's where regulatory gets in. So if a US company wants to do trials in China, you need Chinese regulatory to approve it, and vice versa. And used to be, the regulatory agencies don't talk to each other. But slowly, US, Europe integrated, and Japan integrated into the process. And China actually also integrated into the process around 2017. So it's equivalent to China getting into the WHO of drug development. And now the next stage is for all these regulatory agencies to work together, have a consistent global process to facilitate faster drug development so that patients all around the world could benefit from this kind of collaboration.
What I hear in that is greater reciprocity, greater harmonization of processes and so on that then could lead to the notion of reciprocity, where a drug approval at a stringent regulatory authority could be accepted, or some of the evidence could be accepted. That would be a magnificent outcome because, one, it would allow us to accept, rigorous trials done in another jurisdiction. And this is an important harmonization. So Yishi, I'm struck by your notion that this is tantamount to a WTO kind of acceptance, to say that there could be harmonization between the processes and methods at the China FDA and the US FDA. And I just wonder, Lim Fa, for those of you who are further upstream doing science, I'm sure that would be a welcomed opportunity to see that it could more quickly go from being something in the lab to being something that could be commercialized and so on, could become a product that would be available to patients.
Oh, without any doubt, especially in my field, right? In the pandemic is war, I always say peacetime to wartime. So even when I developed this test, we have to go register in different countries and different rules, it's just totally unnecessary, but that's the world we're living in, right? So that's what I say, we need to work much better, more efficient at a high level. I know, the cancer, cardiovascular, this has a big market, but the infectious disease has a more urgent market. So yes, either we do well or we miss it, right? And that's where, I always say, we don't need to be here we are for COVID-19. There are political reasons, but there are also registered, issues, regulatory issues, and so especially, we're talking about China-U.S., these two countries, if they can work together better, the world will be much better.
Yes, and the science could lead where medical science could lead with saying, here are the opportunities for us to collaborate because our enemy is disease. It's not each other. And it would be lovely to see that. I'm just curious. I mean, for the three of you, I know that we see different opportunities. So one opportunity is to imagine that as a result of this, that we will see greater collaboration. There may be tensions in terms of other kinds of trade goods, tariffs, and so on. But it seems to me that a global public good is the notion of science writ large. It allows us to create new patient opportunities for us to learn more about disease and new ways to treat patients. So, I mean, one of the things that it really strikes me as an opportunity is for us to not see this as an impasse, but to see a breakthrough. So let me put it to you this way. Is there a potential breakthrough that could occur as a result of COVID-19 where we would say, as we see how we collaborated here, we see some new opportunities for collaboration in future. So let me put that first to you, Linfa, and then to the other two panelists. Are there things that you're seeing now that are creating opportunities for collaboration that then could create a pathway or a vector upon which we could create other collaborations going forward? And you've already mentioned a SARS-3. We'd like to have greater global preparedness for the next one.
I mean, in theory, yes, but in practice, the current political environment, I think, is not conducive. So I was really hoping the Alaska meeting, maybe they did it in closed doors, right? Yeah. Because the open discussion is all very politically driven issues. Not only the atmosphere is very political, but the issues are very political. So I was very disappointed for example, the collaboration on COVID-19 was not discussed. I don't know if they discussed it in the closed door. So, as Dr. Xie already says, maybe our overall the biotech field, especially to do with drugs and health, are less political. So that, in terms of prepare for SARS-3, then surely the political leaders will realize that actually we need a closer collaboration. So that's what I said. In theory, that should happen. In practice, I'm not seeing it yet because I think that the current atmosphere does not allow this kind of discussion, at least in public. Okay.
Yes. Yuanchao Shi, what is your own view of this in terms of the tensions that create? I know you said that you're still being able to move forward, but do you see some opportunities that may emerge from our current coping with the pandemic that may be less obvious to the rest of us?
Yeah, so just speak to my own experience, that this COVID thing that prevent us to meet with our partners in China face to face. So at some point, I just have a lot of the Zoom fatigue, and I missed opportunities to celebrate like 3 product approved in China last year. So I was just looking forward to the day that I can, really visit China, my hometown, and to work hand in hand with my partners. With that being said, I think there's also other opportunities that MMC is looking at China, so that it is, for our industry, it is innovate or die. So I think if there's a lot of innovation coming out of China, the companies will definitely get a piece of it, whether through partnerships, acquisitions, or other type of collaborations. So China will play a more important role on a global level for the biotech industry.
Yishi, what is your own view? You were talking earlier about, there's always more money that's chasing fewer, not enough opportunities. So it looks like there may be even more opportunities emerging in the China market to invest in. Do you see those as opportunities for us demonstrating how the two countries can collaborate?
Yes, absolutely. A very, very encouraging trend that we're seeing in the industry is that this new generation of biotech companies, no matter it's founded in the US or founded in China, are actually becoming global sooner. And they realize that US is still the biggest market in the world, but China is the fast growing market and the second largest market when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So no company could claim to be a great company without doing things in both countries. And that's what we're seeing, that a US company, biotech company, 1 or 2 years after it's been founded, they are finding ways to get into China. And Chinese biotech companies doing the same thing to the US. And BeiGene is another great, again, a great example. BeiGene was actually founded by an American. And now BeiGene's budget, if you look into that, half of the money are spent in the US doing clinical studies in the US. So this is an example of a Chinese biotech founded by American. And now it's really a global biotech happened to be based in China. And something you could say about the US companies. So that's a very encouraging thing that I'm seeing, that as companies becoming more global, inevitably, they are bringing the stakeholders together. So, companies are not a US company or Chinese company. They're basically a global company. So that's a very encouraging trend.
Yes. So the notion of the multinational company becoming a kind of diplomacy, as I heard Lim Falwong talking about a kind of post-WHO or a less political, one would hope that companies operating, they need to have regulation. I'm not arguing here for an unregulated market, but I do think that companies can reach across boundaries and borders in a way to bring innovation. It's in their interest, in the interest of their shareholders, and it's certainly in the interest of patients. So it may be that through that vehicle that we see this collaboration that may be difficult on a political level, but when you come to the practical issue of, can we get this product that has like a PSK9 that Yuanchao was talking about, which can help patients who are having cholesterol problems, and here's an injectable agent who qualifies for that. I mean, it'd be very interesting to see as these products become more available. And then further upstream, the kind of work that Lim Falwong is doing allows us to see these, the new science, the new emerging opportunities, and then we need companies to invest in that. So I want to thank all of the presenters tonight. I think you've given us some insight about what is emerging. Certainly starting with COVID, we all care about it. We're worried about it. We're living through it. And we're anxious to get into a post-COVID world. But Linfa has reminded us that there will be a SARS-3. We don't know when, but we are certain that there will be another. And so hopefully we learn from this how to collaborate better. We need great companies like Amgen and others that are multinational to bring new products. And as Yishi has reminded us, it starts with early investment. Many of these are small companies that either a product will be sold or that company will be acquired. So there are opportunities for collaboration occurring now. I want to thank Duke-NUS for putting on the panel tonight and the whole conference. We're delighted to be a part of it, and we're grateful for the people who've listened in and posed their interesting questions. So I'm sure we haven't fully examined everything that can be talked about, but in the brief hour that we had, thank you for listening, and thank you to my panelists for their thoughtful remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to our moderator and our guest speakers for an insightful panel. And thanks you all for participating. And the next panel will begin shortly, will be on education. So hope to see you out there. And also, last thing, I think before we leave, can we have the speakers and the moderator open their videos and smile? We want to take a screenshot of everyone in there.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Yishi. I wonder if you can turn on your video for a short while. We'll take a screenshot together. All right, thank you. The screenshot has been taken.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Job, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Okay.
Thank
bye.
you so much.
Okay, thank you all so much for the speakers of the biotech and healthcare panel. We'll just wait for a few seconds for speakers to get ready. And speakers moderator of the education panel, you can turn on your camera and microphone now. Thank you.
Hi, colors. I cannot turn on my video. It's being stopped. Please release. Okay, now fine.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Farnsworth, can you turn on your camera now? Okay, cool. Okay, let's get started. Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the education panel of the 2021 Duke China-U.S. Summit. My name is Carlos Huan, a student from Duke University, and I am a member of the content design team of the organizing committee. Together with me here is Kunshan Chen, another content design team member from Duke Kunshan University.
Welcome, everybody.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you all for taking your time and coming to this year's Duke China-U.S. Summit, as well as the education panel. The education panel explores the challenges and prospects of global education regarding issues such as international students' visa and travel restrictions, maintaining cooperative programs at the institutional level, and adapting students to non-traditional classrooms. This panel seeks to address these questions from the perspectives of governments, universities, companies, and other educational initiatives in China and the US. Now, it is my greatest honor to introduce our three distinguished speakers at this panel. They are Ms. Alana Xu, founder and director of Shanghai CEDAR Charity Foundation, as well as the founder and CEO of Shanghai Lipro Consulting. Ms. Karin Fischer, senior contributing writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education and research associate at the Center for Studies in Higher Education at the University of California at Berkeley. And Mr. Brad Farnsworth, senior fellow and former vice president of the American Council on Education. And it is my utmost honor to introduce our moderator at the education panel, Dr. Alfred Bloom, executive vice chancellor of Duke Kunshan University, and before that, the founding vice chancellor of New York University, Abu Dhabi, and the president of Swarthmore College. Thank you all so much for joining us in this panel. For the first 45 minutes, Dr. Bloom will lead a moderated discussion with our three speakers. And for the last 15 minutes, we will take some questions from our audience members. So if you have any questions for our speakers or moderator, we would like to ask you to post them on the Q&A section, which you can find in the status bar below. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Ms. Xu, Ms. Fischer, Mr. Farnsworth, and Dr. Bloom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me tell you on the part of the panel, we are delighted to be part of this evening's activity. We think it is utmost important to the future of world peace and to the future of world education that we take a real strong look at the present as we best understand it, look at where the risks for deterioration may be, and look at, most importantly, how we may find ways to transcend those risks and move forward to an even more cooperative and intensively effective broader educational world. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. At this point, I think what might be best, but I'm not sure everybody agrees, is that I turn to each of the panelists in turn. First to introduce him or herself, then to speak to how he or she came to these issues, and then to give us a short overview of how he or she sees the present state of affairs as something that we should be proud of, or at the same time slightly worried about, and what actions might be best to take. Let me start then by asking Shirley to Alana Lee, I'm sorry, to introduce herself and to talk about her general sense of where we are in the Chinese American educational environment. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bloom. Good morning or good evening, everyone. I'm Alana from China. Right now, I'm in a business trip, so I'm based in Zhengzhou. So very happy joining this forum. And myself, I've been together with a few friends, have been set up the charity foundation named the CEDAR, CEDAR. So we have been focusing on how can develop the youth from when they are very young into self-confident, has full courage towards the future. Talk about the current situation. We also think about this right now, why we have this panel to see how in this kind of pandemic situation, we can be together moving forward in this kind of chaotic situation. And briefly for myself, before prior set up the CEDAR Charity Foundation, I've been working 7 years in private sector in China business, basically to experience how an entrepreneur goes through in the market, like windsurfing in the ocean. And also I worked 7 years for a multinational company, working for strategic planning and also managerial consulting. So for that, it's like driving a boat in the ocean. It's so different. The different life experience driving me into set up a charity foundation regarding to education to see how people can develop. This is something we can discuss more and we can share in the later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I look forward to your further comments, but it's really a privilege to have you being able to discuss with you today directions that we may take. I'd like then to turn to Karin Fischer to introduce herself and as Alana did, to give a few comments about how you got into this area of concern and where we all might go following your suggestions.
Thanks, Dr. Bloom. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. So I've been writing about international education for a dozen years. I write about all sorts of aspects of that, including student exchange, including relationships driven by research, and including the flowering of multinational campuses like DKU around the globe. But as I've been doing it for the past decade or so, I think for the United States and for China both, the two countries have come to be each other's most important partners in this. And more Chinese students by far come to study in the United States than any other country. American colleges and universities say that China is their most important partner and their priority for establishing relationships. And I think you see certainly Chinese families really investing in the notion of an American education. And so it's been a really robust relationship that I feel like I've been writing about in terms of student exchange, research partnerships, institutional relationships for the past number of years. But I think we are now at really a pivotal moment where there's been all these forces, political, cultural, related to safety and health, certainly during these pandemic times, that have really strained these relationships. And I think there are real questions right now about where we go from here. And so while I feel like I've been covering the boom, the flowering of the Sino-American partnership in higher education over the past decade, now I'm really interested in covering where does it go from here. And as many commentators have pointed out, with a new presidency in the U.S., higher education relationships, educational exchanges, they may be some of those very first signs of resetting of the relationship. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karin. I'm very much with you in being concerned about where the relationships can go and how we can take advantage of new times and new thoughts and new energy to move them in a positive way. I really do believe that for many across the world, and also for many in China, given the politics of the United States in the last number of years, given the US's less interest in reaching out as a partner in the global world, given also just the very discouraging effects of the pandemic in every way, that America has lost its sense of an ideal nation in terms of its ability, its model to lead the world in terms of coming to a more cooperative and a more mutually effective community. And there's real question about if it's not going to lead, who is going to lead, and where we should invest our time, our kids' time, and the world's time. And so it is something that we have very much to worry about if that kind of loss of America as a model and as a hope is really the world, and I'm afraid it is. I don't want to go any further at this point, but let me turn to Brad then to introduce himself and to talk about where he thinks we are and particularly where we should go.
Thanks, Dr. Bloom, and thanks for inviting me for this very distinguished panel. I'm honored to be with all of you. I will say a little bit about my background. I have worked in higher education my whole career as primarily an academic administrator running international programs, first at Yale University and then at the University of Michigan. And then about 10 years ago, I moved to Washington, D.C. and went to work for the American Council on Education, which is an association of colleges and universities. And I recently left ACE to start my own consulting firm, Fox Hollow Advisory. So really delighted to be here. I have been in and out of the China field my entire career. I did a master's degree in Chinese studies, finished in 1981, just as relations were being normalized between the US and China, and have been pulled into China at various points in my career. The most recent one was with the election of Donald Trump in 2016. There was a rapid deterioration in many aspects of the US-China relationship that did spill over into visa policy, into research collaboration. We can talk about all the areas that have been affected, but I found myself working many hours on the China issue, and I was depressed, I was frustrated, but I also feel like we're at a point now where we're really at an inflection point now where I think we're going to see some significant changes in the relationship. Of the three areas that I'm most concerned about are research collaboration. We can talk about that. And I know that many of the students who are on the Duke Kunshan campus are interested in research careers working for multinational firms. And I just caught most of the panel on healthcare and was really impressed with the work that so many people are doing on that in China. But the other two areas are the flow of Chinese students to the United States and the study of China by Americans. I'm very concerned, particularly about the third. I think we have plenty of people who are interested in China is not in an amateurish way, but just not really willing to spend the amount of time to learn the language and become a true specialist. I think this is a real problem in the United States. Why don't I stop there, and we can pick up on any of those issues during the discussion.
That's great. Well, we all share your concern that we recommit time, we recommit study, and we really seek the opportunities for research collaboration and mutual interaction that is going to not only make both of our nations stronger, but the world much stronger. one thing that various of you mentioned as I got some notes from you and spoke back to you is that it seemed curious, and some of you have talked about DKU, which makes me very happy that you do. It's very curious how much the role of liberal arts education in some form keeps coming up as a topic of discussion and a topic of action in how the world is responding to the desire for greater educational exchange at this point. We've had NYU-Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai. We've had many other liberal arts experiments. We now have DKU as an example of a liberal arts institution. But what really struck me, and many of you mentioned it, is, and the way I see it, is it's not the liberal arts per se that has really been something new. It's the way the liberal arts has been interpreted or has been intended to be interpreted as something new, in the sense that it's not just having a major plus a whole diversification of disciplines as the center of an educational experience, but rather that that diversification of disciplines be focused on something really importantly different from the way it has been focused necessarily in the history of the liberal arts. And that is that it's focused on understanding what are the major problems that are facing the world, that are obstructing cooperation, that are obstructing a sense of human connection and common action towards something like the environment or towards inclusion or towards economic development or health or peace. And that the whole purpose of education becomes much less just having had an exposure to those disciplines or developing expertise in those disciplines, but really an exposure that students have and that professors provide and that they work together to formulate on how to in fact take the liberal arts and make it an instrument of developing an international understanding of what are the problems facing our world and how might we best act to transcend those problems. A very different notion of what liberal arts or even education itself, higher education itself, has been seen as dedicated to in the past. And I think that's part of a real thrust among educators to say, education has to play a role, not just in continuing our relationships, but building what should be in higher education, what should be the content, what should be the purpose if we are going to create a more united world. And something has to be part of what is the core. The core can't just be a set of interdisciplinary exposures. It's got to be a set of opportunities to really engage the issues that the world is confronting and find ways around them. The student life experience can't be just an experience of enjoying each other's company, which is great, and even building connections across difference, but really learning how to stretch across difference, see commonality across difference, understand how much when the Chinese are worrying about an educational reform and the Americans are worrying about an educational reform, it's striking how complex both arguments are, yet how many of the elements of the arguments are the same, how much we have in common on every single aspect of the complicated roads to forming some kind of real understanding. And so I wonder if we can talk a little bit about what you might think can be possible in terms of framing educational purpose so that we not only just accept the world the way it is, but through higher education itself, bring about a coterie of committed people to a world that says communal existence is not only possible, but extremely preferable, and that there is a way of reconciling difference and finding commonality in the future world. I don't know if I will get any takers on that, but I ask anybody to comment.
Well, I'll start, but I will need help. So a couple of things. One is that I've been thinking a lot about what motivates people to do study in other countries. And I just finished editing a volume about US exchanges with Europe. And one of the key takeaways from that is that study abroad really is changing, and it's no longer really about going to a specific destination. Increasingly, we're seeing students interested in a global issue or a global problem. And they want to travel to the countries where they think there are potential solutions or where they think the problem is particularly severe. And so I think that the case for China is part of the solution and is also contributing to the problem in many areas. And so rather than say to American, you need to go to China because China is important, you need to say, here is a global problem. And there are probably many countries there where you really need to travel to find a solution. So I think that integrating international education into these the addressing these global problems, I think is very important. The other thing I'll say is that I'm have really impressed with the really open and exploratory attitude of Chinese students toward education, and the fact that I talk to so many Chinese students who really are genuinely interested in liberal arts education, not just because it happens to be in the United States, and the United States is famous for the high quality of its education, but they really have looked at the essence of liberal arts education, the fact that you're looking at a problem from many different angles, that there may be more than one solution, that your professor who's standing up in front of the classroom does not have all the answers, and it's okay to challenge them and to ask tough questions. Those are things that I think are really something that are very attractive to Chinese students. And I know it's true at Duke-Kunshan, but also it's true among the Chinese students who come to the United States.
I couldn't second that more from my own experience with the students that I'm coming to know this year, and the students for 11 years that I came to know in the Arab world. The thirst among the youth of this world for understanding the problems of the world and for bringing a range of disciplines to understanding those problems, rather than just to learn a set of professions, academic professions or technical professions, is enormous. And if we can really spring the possibility of opening that kind of education broadly, and I don't mean just in China and in Abu Dhabi, but I mean whether it's in Botswana or it's in Nigeria or it's in Bolivia or it's in Myanmar, we will find a fantastic interest, because students, the youth of the world really do understand that that's the way the world's going to be solved, that's how it's going to be a better world, and that it can be a better world. And as soon as they see that mode of thought, and that mode of thought essentially in a collective approach from people from different countries getting together and finding commonality in the way they use it and in the way they discover through it, it is a thrill for the entire generation. So that we have to find ways of opening that from not one national system and another national system, but through a real collective action, I think, among national systems. And I know that the Chinese, despite whatever images people may have, the Chinese system is amazingly concerned and broadly concerned with making itself the best system it can be for all purposes. And the pressure is on at every provincial level, every city level, to figure out how we can do this better. It's really a remarkably reinforcing place to be working on this score. And it gives us a partner, to the extent that we take it, in joining and trying to understand how best to bring this kind of world education system about. Sorry, Alana, would you like to add something, or Karin?
Yeah, I was listening to a professor from France, and then I cannot agree more, actually. Yeah. So you also talk about this. It reminded me when I go through the CEDAR, which is invented by the Professor Otto Scharmer in MIT. He identified the three divides of human beings our global are facing now. So the first one is the divide with nature. We separate ourselves with nature. We lose our sensing connecting with nature. The second is with others, the divide with others. We're more focusing about self rather than how we really understand the human beings, the friends, families around us. How do we really know them? And the third one, actually, the most important one, I think is the divide with self. Do we really know who we are? Do we really know self? Do we know what we really want to live to be? So the three divides, Professor Sharma say we might need three opens to open our mind. Mind is the brain level, the thinking level, the logics of processing information, and open heart, open our entire sensing system towards the world, and open our will, the willingness, how we want to develop the world to be. And on that actually is how we can build our human beings global subconsciousness collective subconsciousness. So for the COVID-19, for the current international situations, the countries struggling, collaborate with each other. For myself, I feel like it is not about individual. It is about entire. If we don't see the planet, it's about human being. How we as a group facing the future challenge. For we as a type of livings on this planet. And for that, I think the future education, more important is to encourage each students to open mind, open heart, open will, to see how we can really build our creative and collaborative together to overcome all the challenges. This is not easy, and this is also a work for our homework for each individual human being. Thank you for now.
Thank you. Karin, did you want to add?
I would say just very quickly, I mean, watching from an American vantage point, it has been very interesting to see the excitement around the sort of core. I mean, I think as you point out, Dr. William, it's really about kind of the core ideas, the core ethos of the liberal arts, I think, that has been embraced, both through these international campuses like DKU, NYU in Abu Dhabi and in Shanghai, Yale in Singapore, but also I think integrated into homegrown educational systems too throughout the world. And it's particularly interesting to watch compared to the US, where you do have real debates and discussions about the value of liberal arts and sort of an education based in critical thinking and free debate versus a very pre-professional kind of education. And so it's very interesting to watch kind of the flowering of that, where, at home, it can sometimes seem like it's, in a retrenchment period. But I think also, as both Alana and Brad have said, this is a moment in which both the challenges are greater to the notion of education as a way to address these kind of world problems, but the potential is also greater than ever. I mean, I think if we can't come around to seeing how a collaboration through education is really valuable in a time of COVID, I mean, when else are you going to make the case for it, really?
I'm so moved by these comments. I remember one education leader I was talking to 2 years ago in Kunming in Yunnan, and he was referring to the fact that as he saw it, Kunming was one end of, or the beginning of, the One Belt, One Road stretch of China. It actually is conceived often of starting in the Philippines and from the maritime point of view and going across China. And then from Kunming, it would cover Central Asia, Middle East, and then it can go on to, in fact, where it already is going on very, very fervently in Africa and South America. And he was saying, if we're going to have this level of influence, and we are over the world, I'm not sure this is the way that the Western world thought of it when it started to have more and more of this kind of influence. What kind of education should we be providing all these people? We can't take a traditional Chinese education and give it to the Bolivian. We can't get a traditional Chinese education and give it to the Kazakhstan person and feel responsible for it. And so the question is, it is a time when the explosive possibility of a broader educational framework, if accepted and excitedly endorsed by many around the world, and especially by those who are going to have the greatest influence, can take place. It can be one of great, I think, contribution to something that is, as Alana was talking about, it is about the nature of a common humanity and the nature of our common understanding. And it is about how, of course, we have to train our students in all important professions, and particularly including in the finance professions and higher technology and big data and so on and so forth. But if that's what we concentrate on alone, it's never going to have the effect of also having created a world in which these things are going to be used in as constructive and population-directed ways as it will if we have an educational framework in which those skills, those professions are learned as they are as professions within something that's much broader in educational context. That's definitely what DKU is looking for. That's what the NYU-Abu Dhabi and Shanghai experiments have been looking for. And I really believe the world is looking for that kind of broader sense of integration. If the US is losing it right now, which I'm less aware of than you are, it's something we need to work to correct, because it's not no profession is going to be the answer, or no four professions are going to be the answer. They may have economic implications in the long run. They may have amazing implications for the comfort and safety of humanity, but that doesn't mean they have enough in just learning those directions to be the creators of a more inclusive and mutually recognized world. So I think that this is ironic that it's happening in the United States in the way you describe. What kinds of directions does anyone on the panel think that we should be most looking for then in terms of our next steps? As let's say we were a panel, and we are, and at the end we sat down and said, what are the things we recommend to the world of education to put highest in priority right now? And this is not the world of education in Durham, or the world of education in Cambridge, or the world of education even just in DKU and Kunshan, but rather that as the world starts to look at directions of education, what should we be emphasizing that they pay attention to in the cultivation of an education for the 21st century?
So, Dr. Bloom, I might start.
Excellent. Please do.
Yeah, I think about the education. What you talked remind me when I was young, I loved to travel. I traveled more than maybe when after traveled more than 60 countries. One day I was walking on the street of Italy, Roma, and then all of a sudden I have a feeling. So all the human beings are the same. We were born, we grew up, we get jobs, we get families, and we go through a cycle. So why we divided into so many nationalities, countries, races, and so different? And I think from that day on, lots of questions pop up to me, and this is guiding me into the exploration regarding to education and life exploration as well. So towards the future education, what I felt like if I observe the young generation in China and also some young youth in other countries, it's like what's the responsibility for them at this moment? So what's the responsibility the young generation should take up on for the future of this planet? So why? why they're learning. So the learning will, how can back up them, support them to take on their responsibility. In Chinese, we said that, anciently we said that, 为天地立心，为生民立命，为往圣开，为万世开太平. It's like we learn for us to take the far beyond responsibility, beyond self. It's for the entire, I mean, it's a mission, how you live out that. This is the first one. How can the education can awaken the young generation to think about their responsibility for the future? The second one might be, it's because the university actually is built the foundation, like the tall building, right? So in the university, I think there are 4 pillars actually cross each other. Like they start to really think about learning, really think about the relationship, make us have a girlfriend, boyfriend, and also think about the profession, the job for the future. And if there's another pillars, could be about the business. The business means their dream, they're passionate for, and what they can build on in the future, rather than just to get a job for income. So the young generation, especially the kids I think are born after 2000, they are a generation different from before. Like we were born like 1970s. It's so different. They think about that. And the 4 pillars cross each other and integrate each other, building a people's life. And they might think about what I learned, what my relationship towards, and what the dreamed job, all the things I can create, what's the impact from me towards the external, towards the others, towards the world. And if they can build on from that, then they know what they should learn, be clear, and what capabilities they should develop, and what kind of the future dream the self could be. So I might stop here, just too much, a lot. Thank you.
Does anyone want to add directly? This is really inspiring to me. And I can tell you that one of the things that I'm finding as I work with Chinese education leaders on what education could be for a future world, it is so apparent how much has been put aside, as it were, in accepting the Western model. So much of other cultural richness on what education should be about, particularly a sense of broader responsibility to society and as part of what education is about. A broader responsibility to see oneself as having responsibility for the world as part of what education has been about. And that as that process evolves, to realize how much we can draw from, whether it's Chinese, 3,000 years of Chinese thinking on education, crystallized often in various sayings, 4-character sayings, or longer sayings that capture thousands of years of insight and add to the language and add to the culture. And that they're there, and that all of a sudden people realize, yes, we cannot move to a view of education for the world that is essentially the adoption of Western education. We've tried that for several years, like several hundred years. It's put down a lot of cultures, it's aided a lot of cultures, but it doesn't have all the answers. It clearly doesn't. And the same exactly was true as I worked in the Muslim world, that there is so much thought and sense of responsibility for the whole and for the broader than the self, and looking for things that are more important than particularly materialist values or even any specific values. And I think the more one starts thinking about what should be in that educational syllabus of a 21st century future, the more one will realize how much the world can contribute that has been often put aside, as the Western model has been the one that has been adopted on thinking in that sense and analytically by so much of the world, leading to a much better place for all. But I completely agree with what you're saying.
Alana's made me think about a word, and I don't know if there's a Chinese word for it. I'm sure there is, and I apologize, I don't know, but cosmopolitanism. And this is the idea that education gives you a broad global perspective on the world's problems and the potential solutions. And when I talk to Chinese students, this is very much why they want to study in the United States. And there are a couple of concerns I have about this, because when I read interviews with Chinese students in the US, many of them feel very isolated. And they come to the United States wanting to make friends with Americans, and they want to make friends with other people from other countries, and they want to learn more about American culture. And I think that there's a stereotype that Chinese students, particularly the students in the science and engineering fields, are only in the United States to earn a degree, and that's simply not true. And I think in the United States, we need to do a much better job of really giving Chinese students a cosmopolitan experience where they really learn about the United States and about the rest of the world. And I think that when it comes to solving the world problems, as Dr. Bloom was saying, the solution may not be a Chinese solution. The solution may not be an American solution. It may be a combination of solutions that are assembled from around the world. And I keep thinking back to the panel that just came before this one on healthcare. And these tremendously impressive speakers, all Chinese, all with beautiful, perfect English, and have lived for many years in China and outside of China. They're comfortable working in any country in the world, and probably in any industry in the world, but they've chosen healthcare. I would say they're the ideal, and we need more of them.
I mean, I guess I would just sound, not to be the wet blanket, but just this is a time of challenge, and we have had nationalism injected into higher education in a way that it has not been so prominent for years. And it is, you know, I think we are all in agreement about the way in which coming together, you know, education can be a way to really be a force for good and for addressing these global challenges, and for weaving together people in ways that they have not before. But yet, the unfortunate reality is also that in both China and the US, in a way that has not been for decades, higher education has become sort of central to these tensions about kind of global geopolitics, and that is something that university leaders and even students themselves are going to have to navigate, and it is a challenge that's going to kind of color what happens into the future.
I worry that you're right. I'm sure that you're right in many important respects. But I also, from just talking about how can we get with, whether it's the Chinese Bureau of Education on a city level or a province level, I'm hoping to move on to talk at the national level, of the interest of really coming together in a broader sense to an analysis of how to make the system better from a world perspective, from a cosmopolitan perspective, however it's articulated. It's very real. It's very real, I would say, because we don't have something comparable in terms of a systemic way of looking at things in the US, that it's very real, more than I see it happening in the United States, where these discussions are so much centered in individual institutions and you know, individual, let's say, state departments of education, where the ideas are not being generated, I'm afraid. So that it is very possible. I just think that we should not let any images of what China seems to be like, impenetrable, holistic, unyielding, decided on a particular course, sway our minds before we give people that opportunity to see how much diversity of thought there is and how much interest in finding the right answer there is. And so I don't say that we don't have all these problems that you're worried about, and I tend to be too optimistic, I agree. But usually that optimism has paid off in terms of what I saw happen in the development of Swarthmore or NYU-Abu Dhabi or now DKU. And so I really think that there is an amazing potential for capturing that, as was said earlier, that interest in cosmopolitanism, that interest in the liberal arts, that interest in weighing differences of perspective and looking for a better answer. That if we believe is there, and if we look for, and if we don't find, if we try to create, it is possible. And I think we should all be really empowered by the fact that, in fact, just having this panel, having this discussion is open. There is no question on any side of being unable to talk about this freely. And I think that we should be doing it and acting on it as freely as we can. Should we be opening soon to the broader audience for any questions? Carlos?
Yes, okay, I can go over the questions in the Q&A,
Okay.
where you can go over it and the Q&A panel.
No, go ahead. Okay, whatever you think best.
Okay, so the first question is, can we have required courses on news reading, perhaps 1 hour per week? Most students are so busy that they do not read news at all. Many Americans do not read news. If students are required to read news, more American families will be better informed of the national and world news. What are the perspectives and intakes of this question?
I could start by saying, I don't think the problem is the required news reading. I think the problem is exciting students and curricularly directing students to really become involved in the issues that are facing the world. If they do, whether they read them or they hear them on CNN or they tell each other about them, the point is that if education narrows people to just work on their professions and does not build in them the citizenship skills for both listening and connecting and finding out what real problems are about and learning the disciplines that will inform them about how to respond to those issues, then education is failing them. So a course in news reading may help. I'm not denying that a lot of students would profit from reading the news, but I do think that whoever is asking the question is really asking a deeper question on, is education about a set of things that we assume everybody should know, or is it about a set of things that everybody should have analyzed so that they understand the world better and can be builders of a better world? Sorry, I went on too long on that one. Someone else might want to comment on my course.
Good answer.
You did a lot of news reading when you were young, I know that.
News reading. Yeah, we are really overwhelmed by the information now. If you open your mobile every day, you can just dive into all the information without doing anything. But what we need to learn, especially now in university, we need to learn how to build our own filter system. What do we need? What we should focus on? And what is essential for me right now? How me interact with the international world, then always try to remind where I am now and what is the most essential for me, and how to filter information. Please be really careful about do not be overwhelmed by those information and news. And you never know if the news has been already filtered to show you. You read what the others picked up for you. So be careful.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Anyone else want to contribute? Thank the audience for that question. Maybe we could take one more next question from the audience.
Okay, let's move on to the next question if you don't have any more insights. Okay, so the next question is, how do we foster a collaborative education environment where both the US and China seem steadfast on retaining talent in their own countries? Some countries have criticized China's 1,000 Talents program for stealing talent by providing enticing opportunities and funding for research. How do we transform a tense and competitive research environment into a space of free-flowing ideas? What are some of the biggest barriers?
Well, Karin has written a lot about this. I don't want to put her on the spot. What if I start, Karin? You can. There's a lot to say. This has been a huge issue for the last 4 years, and Karin's right that there's a lot to be disappointed in with our government. I'll start by saying that a lot of these issues are real. So when you look at the 1,000 Talents program, for example, there have been violations of university rules in the United States. That being said, the punishment is much greater than the crime and is out of proportion to the crime. And so a violation that in normal times would mean maybe a warning to the professor, maybe a very minor disciplinary action, over the last 4 years led to the firing, in some cases, the criminal prosecution of professors in the United States. And I would say it's not just ethnic Chinese. Of course, there's a very famous case of a Harvard professor who's not ethnic Chinese, who has been charged with criminal charges for his participation in the 1,000 Talents program. My own feeling is that this can be fixed. And actually, when I think about all the problems in the US-China relationship, I think this is one of the easier ones to fix. It really is about improving transparency. It's about improving communication. It's about setting a set of norms and rules and standards that apply to universities all over the world when they collaborate. And it's putting those standards in writing and making sure they're enforced. And I believe that the vast majority of university leaders in China would agree that this is the solution. And they're ready to talk. They're ready to have a conversation with their counterparts in the United States. And someone just needs to lead that conversation. That being said, I think there is tremendous, I mean, we were just talking about COVID in the previous panel. There are disciplines in the United States that simply could not exist without Chinese collaboration. I'm very familiar with, I married into a family of physicists, so I know a lot about physics. Physics would not exist in the United States as we know it without collaboration with China, without research funding, without students, without doctoral programs. And so it's not just, both countries stand to lose unless we can fix this problem.
Yeah, I mean, Brad is spot on, and 40% of the physics PhDs in America go to Chinese nationals. We wouldn't have physicists if we didn't have Chinese students who wanted to come to American universities. And in fact, many of those students stay. And so it's a real challenge. I think, as Brad says, there are easy solutions. In some ways, what has happened, not to minimize some of the violations, but essentially we have taken what's often paperwork challenges and put them into criminal prosecutions in the US, and that's not helpful. I think the real thing that concerns the folks that I talk to, the scientists, is what happens going forward? If this keeps going on both sides, does it become, does it have a chilling effect? And so do you have younger scientists who say, look, the US has great laboratories and has great experts in this field, but I'm going to go elsewhere. And does that then weaken the for my PhD, that is. And does that then weaken those really incredibly strong ties that exist on the individual research level between China and the US? And I think the other thing that is happening is, in a way, these thousand talents questions, which are in some ways very narrow, issues of transparency and of being open about ties, do they start to infect other parts of the relationship? And so then all of a sudden you start having Chinese students writ large sort of tarnished by these questions that have got nothing to do with them. They're not doing sensitive research, they're not engaged in this area, and somehow it all just gets kind of swept up in this mass, like broad brush characterization of the Sino-American higher education relationship.
I'm not sure this adds much because this is far from my field, but I do believe when we start talking about complex issues that seem to divide the nations, such as intellectual property, let's say, and what is the basis of claiming private intellectual property? What is the basis of saying I went to MIT, that's what I studied, I brought it back. I certainly didn't feel like I was stealing any American property by doing well in my PhD thesis at MIT. That these issues are hard to approach, in part because there's an assumption that even the complex, subtle value differentiations, the points of subordination and superordination, and so on, that we would make won't be understood or won't be conceded or won't be appreciated by a Chinese audience. And what I think one finds in working with the Chinese on any complex issue is it's not that things aren't understood. It's not that things aren't understood with the same exact subtlety that they're understood in the West. And therefore, it's not that we don't have a platform for finding a resolution. That is a cultural assumption that the language or the culture or experience made it impossible to come together. And I find again and again on the most subtle issues that is an incorrect assumption in almost every case. And if it's correct, then it can be overcome. And that we have to join, if we want to find a way, this has just been suggested by both of you, a way of talking about, let's talk about intellectual property and what we claim it and they would claim it, how we should claim it, how they should claim it, how the world should claim it, and figure out as deeply as it has to go, as legally detailed as it has to go, as we would in a complex financial agreement, which has to be as subtle and as comprehensive of every detail as possible. Because we're going to find that our thinking is no different. Our ability to conceptualize and abstract and differentiate is no different. And even the kinds of words that we're using are no different in a fundamental sense. And so there is room for this kind of resolution. And since there is and it can work, we've got to try it. And you're so right, Karin. We can't let the innocent kid who's going over, the innocent physicist who wants to create a new physics thesis, be trapped in something that can be settled if there is a group of people concerned from both sides who differentiate the arguments, make it clear, come up with an understanding, and stop legislative war before the legislative war has any right to exist. I really am it's quite, I mean, I've worked in Chinese for a long time. I'm still not where I want to be, but I can tell you that as you get into issues like, what should be a valid diploma under the Gaokao system or not the Gaokao system and so on, the arguments can't get any more complex there than they would get in what the middle states or southern states talks about as every detail of what should go for accreditation. But they're all striving for the same kind of justice. And we can come together, and it doesn't matter that the two cultures are at play in that struggle.
Mr. do you have anything you want to share? Or shall we move to one final question?
One final question. Does anyone want to add something from our group?
Okay, cool. So the last question will be, how will the development of non-traditional form of quote unquote classrooms, such as online learning platforms, contribute to the shape or reshape of the purpose of education?
Say this again, I'm sorry, I just didn't get it. How does the development?
Excuse me, how does the development of non-traditional classrooms, such as online learning platforms, contribute to reshape or shape the purpose of education?
Can I answer that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I really feel envy for now the students, because you have the most advanced technology to help you to build about learning. So classroom, non-classroom. Can you learn really in the classroom? Are you really pay attention to the professor's talks? Are you really learn from each other? Not necessarily. But now, if you want to learn, the entire world is open to you. You have internet. You connect to any major, any scientifics, any things you want to learn, you access the full information pool. So I really encourage, please do not be blocked by the classroom. There's no classroom. Classroom is just a format for you to know a group of people can study together and know each other better. But any subject you really want to learn, it's for yourself. It's not be restricted by the format. Thank you.
I'm so with you in terms of using the opportunity, but I think of the way Confucius taught or the way Socrates taught, which are sort of parallel figures in terms of both the Socratic method, which could have been called the Confucian method. There is something about the interactivity of minds, direct interactivity of minds that's happening right now with us at this panel. And we've just, from a motivational point of view and from a pushing people along point of view to break down assumptions and rethink thoughts and so on, become so central that we have to find a way to combine what you're saying and what I'm saying. That is that we have to find a way to make sure that as all knowledge becomes available, because it's on that web, it's through, we can get it on the internet, we're not losing the ability to shape what is the sense of significance or the sense of a breakthrough, for example, in how important it is for education to create a better world for us in terms of humanity. I know you agree. So the issue is how to find in whatever new system we have a way of combining that motivational part and that exploding set belief part that has been part of the classroom, or hopefully in a world of non-personal dynamics. And I would agree completely when we find how to do both.
Can I just add one thing quickly, which is that we still have a problem all over the world, including the United States, with access to the internet. And so this is often called the digital divide. And even in the cases where people have internet, they do not have a quiet place to study and to work. And so when we think about liberal arts, we think about discussion, we think about getting a group of students together and disagreeing and agreeing and having a lot of interaction. Well, that takes concentration, and it takes a dedicated location in your home. I mean, these are just very simple problems. And yet, even in a wealthy country like the United States and a rapidly growing country like China, there are many people who do not have this access. And so we need to be careful not to assume that everybody is starting with all the same advantages.
Yeah, that's also true.
Well, thank you very much, audience, for volunteering our last questions and keeping us on a very constructive and an important course. And most of all, thank you, panelists, for coming together for exactly that kind of liberal arts discussion I would see very much reflective of the liberal arts, I hope will evolve, which is not just a acceptance of wanting a range of disciplinary experience, but a disciplinary experience that really brings us to focus on what the major problems of the world are and how we can take steps towards transcending those, and how education itself can be an absolute guide to shaping and motivating a resolve to find commonality in the world and to build on that commonality, which I believe it can, and which I believe the Chinese and the members of the United Arab Emirates, where I worked 11 years, and the United States are really committed to using education for. So let's find a way to do it. And thank each of you. I'm so glad to have come to know you and look forward to future interactions, and whether they're on the web or in person, both of which will be appreciated. Good morning and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you again for sharing your insights and providing us with more substantiated understanding of the challenges and perspective of education. And again, and also we want to greatly appreciate all members of the audience for your engagement and thoughtful questions. We are running over time a little bit, but this is the end of today's activity. So again, thank you for coming and participating. And a reminder is that the technology panel will start at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow morning for EDP and 8:30 p.m. tonight for Beijing time. So everybody's also welcome to join that. And it would be great if all the panelists could stay for maybe a few seconds and we can take a screenshot together. And maybe
Carlo,
here.
thank you. Let me intervene to thank you and your colleagues for hosting this, for conceiving this. It's a really wonderful contribution to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I think we are.
Oh, sorry, please smile. I'm taking the photo from the audience view. All right, 3, 2, 1. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to all the audience. Thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good day, good night.
Thank you. I hope. Bye.